So in this video we'll be talking about setting up your motion settings in myCNC and how to actually granularly modify and adjust the settings for your axis speeds, accelerations, etc. But first, let's go into the settings to actually see what we're talking about, and this can be done by going into your myCNC settings, configuration, and motion tab right here. Now let's go over the settings to see what options are available to the user. First, we have this CV tolerance value, and this CV tolerance, or constant velocity tolerance, signifies the amount of smoothing on corners that is allowed. So this is the maximum amount of smoothing. And this is typically done in order to make the program go through the corners a little faster, instead of stopping at every sharp corner. So as you can see in this image on the screen, the tolerance describes the distance from the ideal corner to the actual tip of the real corner that the machine will produce during the cut. Next we have S-curve smooth filtering, which specifies the time the controller gives the machine to adjust the acceleration during sharp turns. So here a larger value will allow for a larger impulse time, and this will result in reduced stress and reduced shock to the machine hardware. So by default we recommend the value of 41 milliseconds. Next we have the acceleration override slider right here, and this allows the user to change how the acceleration behavior works on their machine. So this can go from very rapid changes to your speeds at corners. You're very rapidly decelerating and accelerating at corners. And this obviously can cause some smoothness issues, or it can cause the motor operations to suffer. Or you can select on the other end of the scale a very smooth cut with very slow acceleration, deceleration at corners, but this will obviously result in a much longer time for the job to complete. And this is dependent on the user, on the speeds, on the tolerances, accelerations they're running. So it's recommended to play around with this value a little bit to see what works for you. Next we have the Lookahead brake angle, and this is the value such that if the angle at the corner is larger than this, the machine will stop at that corner completely in order to allow for a sharper cut. So there will not be any smoothing, it will actually be a very sharp, very angular cut. And an example of such a cut can be seen in this very image right here. So here we're approaching the corner, and you can see how for Vx our speed drops to 0 here and then picks back up again, while for Vy we are simply changing the way the Y direction, I guess, moves. Next we have our 2D cutting, and this is the toggle that is typically only used on plasma and gas machines which lack a configurable Z-axis. So if you don't have a Z-axis that is configurable through the software, you enable this option, but for most purposes this option is turned off by default. Next we have our step jog count here, and that specifies whether the user wants the machine to monitor the inputs that are sent to it as it's already moving, or if the user doesn't. So to explain this a little bit, if this is selected, the machine will count however many signals are sent to it, even if it's moving already, so it already has a motion command sent to it, let's say by a hotkey or by pressing a button on the screen, a jog button. And if it is not selected, then the machine will ignore all other signals until it's completed its initial movement. So this also allows to set up your pendant control with a, let's say, a jog wheel, or an MPG wheel rather, which will either count the number of impulses sent from the pendant and move in according distance, or it will instead try to match the rotation speed of the pendant wheel, and then it will move only when the wheel is moved, and then it will stop when the wheel is stopped. Again, this is largely dependent on your workflow and what you prefer, so there isn't any right way to set this particular setting, and we don't have a default recommended. Next, we have our fast drawing right here, which allows us to move over a part in our drawing process to check the movement path, and this is done at speeds that are higher than our normal cutting speed. So this is typically used on plasma and gas machine setups with a lower cutting speed. Next, we have our sync for our G0 and G1 to 3 overspeed, which allows the user to sync the rapid and the cutting speeds. And this is done for this set of buttons on our main screen. If we go back to the main screen right here, so these buttons right down here, which adjust the overspeed, if we have that setting turned on, this will allow the user to use this one set of buttons to change those overspeeds at the same time. So if it's set to on, then both the G1, G2, and G3 and the G0 overspeed will be changed, so our speeds will be synced. And if the check mark is set to off, then when pressing these main screen buttons, only the G1, G2, and G3 speeds will be changed, and then controlling the G0 overspeed will be possible only through the motion dialog here. And an important note on overspeeds here is that overspeed acts in a manner that is reminiscent of CPU overclocking. So motion acceleration is increased together with motion speed when the overspeed is increased. So it's not just your motion speed, it's also the acceleration. And since the toolpath planner within myCNC doesn't have access to the overspeed value, a significant increase to, let's say, 200, 300%, etc., will probably cause issues, especially for analog server control. And for most cases, your overspeed should be limited to 100 if you need to be sure that the machine does not exceed max speed. So if you have some sort of a max speed that you would never want to exceed, you should always limit your overspeed to 100%. And another note here is that there is a typical overspeed range from for the ET6, 7, and 10 controllers, and that ranges from the lower bound of 5% to a high bound of 150%. So setting overspeed value to values higher than 150 will probably lead to performance issues, especially on older controllers. Next, we have our creep speed, which is somewhat of a legacy option. This specifies the speed of the machine after it begins to cut into the working material. So this is, again, advisable to set it to be lower than your actual working speed, and this time is specified in seconds if you would rather use that. And as I've mentioned, this is largely a legacy option because while using creep speed or creep time allows you to use a slower movement during the initial pierce of the material, the pierce process, and this does result in less wear on the plasma or your gas torch. Modern plasma torches actually allow for a much more focused cut than before, and this renders the option somewhat obsolete. However, if you have an older plasma machine or a gas cutting machine, you're more than welcome to use this option to actually have less wear on your torch. Next, we have the jog G0 and G1, G2, G3 overspeeds, and this signifies the values by which the speed is higher or lower than the one specified by the running program. And this is again useful to be able to change your speeds on the fly. And again, the minimum and the maximum values specify the speed boundaries so that the operator cannot accidentally go over or under the maximum or the minimum speed limits by using the buttons on the main screen. Next we have the arc cutting section right here, and I have actually described the arc cutting or arc speed control in a separate video, the link to which should be at the bottom of the screen, so you can open this video by typing in the following link in your browser or by going to our channel and searching for a video titled Hole and Arcs Cutting Speed. But to do a very quick summary of that, this is used on, let's say, plasma machines when cutting arcs, such as rounded corners or holes. And you can set the diameter, the cutting speed from your cut charts, the arcs cutting speed again from the cut charts, and certain profiles such as the X1366P also have those speeds displayed on the main screen on the more recent variation of those profiles. However, I do have a separate video which you're more than welcome to watch if you're interested in the arc speed control. And then here we have this table for our speed and acceleration values, which allows you to edit the values for your feed speed, your rapid speed, jog speed, acceleration, etc. And here, a quick word of note is that some of you may have noticed, or some of you may know, that this is effectively a more complete version of the settings that are available to you by going into the user menu or the user settings menu from the main software screen. So if we navigate back to the main screen and we go into the user settings, we also do have the feed rate, rapid rate, etc. Available to us right here. However, as you can see, it's a much more limited, much smaller settings window. And if you go back into the motion tab, you have a number of different settings and options here. And what you're also able to do, as you can see here, is that you're able to not only specify the values for a particular axis, but you can also use a combination of axes. So for example, XY or XYZ or ABC, etc. You can type in the axes to have the same values, or you can also, of course, use them individually. And if you'd like to change these values, after you've changed them, you can press the Save button and you can reload the application for the changes to take effect. Again, the editing of these values can be done here or from the user settings window, which is again accessible from the main screen. However, again, this is a much more extensive settings table. I do like to note that if you are constantly finding yourself going into the settings table in the motion tab, because let's say you simply don't have a combination or an axis in your user settings, you can actually change, you can customize the user settings tab right here by editing the XML files for your particular profile. And we do have a full manual on the myCNC screen configuration process, which I'm linking down at the bottom of the screen right here. However, this is a separate process, and again, if you would rather not edit the XML files, you would rather not bother with the customization, the motion settings will suffice if you do not need this customization, which again will simply take more time if you're not using them consistently. So this should cover the basics of setting up your motion for your machine. If you have any other questions, you can consult our documentation at docs.pvautomation.com, or you can reach out to us at our forum at forum.pvautomation.com. Thank you for watching.